I've said on many occasions the King James Version of the Bible is probably one of the worst, if not the worst translation you could possibly use. I have only briefly covered it in my videos, but I decided to take this time to explain to the KJV-only Christians why their choice of Bible is poor. Although I'm an atheist, I think it's important to have the best possible translation. The reason is twofold. For Christians, it would be much better if they actually knew what the original text said, and for non-Christians, it would really be better if we were able to fully understand what it is we're criticizing. So I think this is important for everyone. So today, I will be outlining the reasons why the KJV is a bad translation.
The whole point in this refutation video is to touch on the exact statements against the KJV itself. Let's check their Facebook page. Milwaukee Atheists. Bio. The atheist community of Milwaukee is a non-profit organization that fights for reasoning and logic. An atheist is going to try to explain why the King James Bible is a bad translation. This is a heathen trying to tear apart God's word by claiming it's a bad translation. Well, let's see how well their reasoning is and how well they use logic. He says, although I'm an atheist, I think it's important to have the best possible translation. The reason is twofold. For Christians, it would be much better if they actually knew what the original text said. And for non-Christians, it would really be better if we were able to fully understand what it is we're criticizing. Rebuttal: in order for you to know what the original text said, you need the original autographs. Any history not directly observed, even though copied or translated, can only be believed. A common blunder argument is referring to original languages to judge the KJV. Definitions from Webster's 1828, manuscript. A book or paper written with the hand or pen. Written with the hand, not printed. Original. 1. Origin. See origin, with which it accords in signification. 2. Fountain, source, cause, that from which anything primarily proceeds, that which gives existence or beginning. Therefore the phrase, original manuscript, literally means, the first existence or beginning of any book or paper written with the hand or pen. Since so many people reference to original manuscripts, then they must have access to them. Problem is, they no longer exist. It is not possible to trace back to the original languages. Therefore you cannot reference to them because you have never seen them. A parable to show you how ridiculous his opening statement is. Suppose I said, although I'm not a mechanic, I think it's important to have the best Toyota vehicle possible. The reason is twofold. For mechanics, it would be much better if they actually knew what the original vehicle looked like in the original manual that came with it. For non-mechanics, it would really be better if we were able to fully understand what it is we're critiquing in modern vehicles. Is it possible for anybody today Toyota vehicle ever made? No. Is it possible to directly observe the original manual that came with it? No. Therefore it is absurd and utterly ludicrous to claim it's best to know what the original vehicle looked like and what the original manual said if they are gone and no longer exist. See this source. Toyota's first passenger car is the Toyota Model A passenger car, which was designed in 1935 using the Chevrolet and the DeSoto as a reference. This was listed in the catalog as a standard sedan, but that meant standard from the viewpoint of an advanced automotive country like the United States.
First of all, the KJV is written in Old English. Some of its verses are hard to understand, if not completely incomprehensible to modern English speakers. The meanings of some of the words and phrases have changed a lot over time. Some of the words have completely fallen out of the common vernacular. When was the last time you heard clasps, brooches, and buckles referred to as ouches? Or do you ever hear of algum wood being used in modern construction projects? Probably not. We don't even know what algum wood is, but our best guess is juniper trees. The word chode just meant chide, but its meaning has completely changed.
His main argument is that some of the words and verses are not comprehensible and hard to understand. Some of the words we no longer use, they have changed their meaning and spelling over time. Is that God's fault? No. He doesn't have to keep updating his words just because we have become more stupid over time. Anybody with half a brain, even atheist George Carlin, observed this and testified to it, that people are becoming more stupid as time goes on. There are a lot more stupid people around than there were many years ago because things get worse. Also look at the moral state of our country. It's a lot lower now. I can prove that by objective, directly observed history that I lived. When I was a kid going to school, I never had a drag queen or an inappropriate sex cartoon illustrated book for children of 10 years and older in my school library. Now they are allowing them. When I was a kid, I did not know anything about transgender issues. Now they are a primary discussion and teachers are encouraged to hide information and lie to parents. God does not have to dumb down His word because people have become more stupid and willfully ignorant over time. This is also a double standard accusation. See this source. Origins of the turkey. Modern bowlers of any skill level have a reasonable shot of scoring a turkey, 3 strikes in a row, in a game. Bowling was once significantly more challenging, however, so the achievement was a rarity. In earlier incarnations, lanes were uneven, pins were handset and, most importantly, pins were often weighted to make them harder to knock down. To this end, tournaments in the 18th and 19th centuries featured major prizes for outstanding accomplishments, from food baskets to hams, and yes, live turkeys. While no one really knows who or exactly where it started, tournament runners started giving out live turkeys to bowlers who managed to score 3 consecutive strikes. For a time, it was an especially common prize at holiday tournaments, namely in the US. You'd be hard-pressed to win a gobbler today, but we do carry on the tradition by way of language, terming the 3-strike feat itself a turkey. As time has passed, we've added to the bowling vernacular, too, with a whole host of names for multi-strike accomplishments. The turkey being applied to 3 strikes in a row is a very archaic term of usage. So does this mean that you should go to bowling alleys and demand they update their phraseology because it could confuse somebody, especially someone from a foreign country? Are you going to do that? If not, then you have no business throwing accusations against an English Bible from the 17th century, just because they are archaic words in the text. Hypocrite.
The King James is the only Bible that translates wild ox to unicorn. In modern English, those don't mean nearly the same thing. It also talks about other mythical creatures like dragons and satyrs. This is simply the kind of thing that happens when a language has had a lot of time to develop. It evolves into something barely recognizable. But that alone isn't a problem with the KJV. There's a reason I urge fellow atheists not to criticize the Bible as a book of fairy tales based on the mythical creatures in the KJV. The words have changed meaning, and it would be inappropriate to criticize it based on modern English.
Rebuttal. He just contradicted himself. First, he entitles his video, Why the King James Bible is a Bad Translation, and the first point he gives is this.
So today, I will be outlining the reasons why the KJV is a bad translation. First of all, the KJV is written in Old English. Some of its verses are hard to understand, if not completely incomprehensible to modern English speakers. The meanings of some of the words and phrases have changed a lot over time. Some of the words have completely fallen out of the common vernacular.
But then at this time frame he says this.
But that alone isn't a problem with the KJV. There's a reason I urge fellow atheists not to criticize the Bible as a book of fairy tales based on the mythical creatures in the KJV. The words have changed meaning, and it would be inappropriate to criticize it based on modern English.
You're contradicting your own premise. It went from, why the KJV is a bad translation and criticize it in the first point for using Old English, to, well, it's not a problem in the KJV and we don't want our fellow atheists to criticize the Bible because of old words, which would make it inappropriate to criticize that according to our modern English. Secondly, how do you know the KJV is the only Bible that translates, wild ox, to unicorn? Have you looked at every English version, which are over 150? The word unicorn is found 9 times in the KJV text. The word unicorn is found these example passages in these other Bibles. I could give more passages, but you get the point. These atheists are wrong. And yes, those are considered Bibles. Their claim is wrong. Lastly, under this point he says, it also talks about other mythical creatures like dragons and satyrs. Yes, the word dragon is found 34 times in the KJV. Summary definition and context from Webster's 1828, dragon. A kind of winged serpent, a fiery or imaginary serpent. Satyr. In mythology, a sylvan deity or demigod, represented as a monster, half man and half goat, having horns on his head, a hairy body, with the feet and tail of a goat. Yes, the word satyr is found twice in the KJV. Isaiah 13:21 But wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and their houses shall be full of doleful creatures, and owls shall dwell there, and satyrs shall dance there. Context. Isaiah 13:1 The burden of Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amoz did see. What God will do. Verses 9, 11, 19-20. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, cruel both with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy the sinners thereof out of it. And I will punish the world for their evil, and the wicked for their iniquity, and I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease, and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. In Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation, neither shall the Arabian pitch tent there, neither shall the shepherds make their fold there. Main verse, 21. But wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and their houses shall be full of doleful creatures, and owls shall dwell there, and satyrs shall dance there. 22. And the wild beasts of the island shall cry in their desolate houses, and dragons in their pleasant palaces, and her time is near to come, and her days shall not be prolonged. In other words, God is angry with the sin of people, and he will replace people like the shepherds who may have lived there, with demonic creatures, like the satyr. Verse 21. According to the definition and scripture context, satyrs are the opposite of God's creatures. I believe they are demonic beings. Also dragons. Verse 22. Most pictures of dragons are from the reptile family. Are they dinosaurs? I believe so. It's very evident from their size. Is it possible a creature could breathe fire and be mischievous, as historians say some dinosaurs were? Yes. So there's no reason to call dragons other mythical creatures. The second passage. Isaiah 34:14. The wild beasts of the desert shall also meet with the wild beasts of the island, and the satyr shall cry to his fellow, the screech owl also shall rest there, and find for herself a place of rest. Verse 2:13. For the indignation of the Lord is upon all nations, and his fury upon all their armies, he hath utterly destroyed them, he hath delivered them to the slaughter. And thorns shall come up in her palaces, nettles and brambles in the fortresses thereof, and it shall be an habitation of dragons, and a court for owls. Dragons, verse 13, and satyrs, 14. This is the result of God's wrath. God can put demonic beings in places where possible righteous people used to be. Because of sin, the righteous have been removed or simply died out of it. There are people today that would probably say the megalodon was a mythical creature. Just like there are people denying the Holocaust ever happened. Yes, I understand that every bit of history not directly observed can only be believed, based upon either blind faith or evidence. Moving on.
It's important to note that there is no such thing as a perfect translation. It would of course be better if we could read the Bible in its original languages, Hebrew and Greek, but I think it would be unreasonable for every Christian to be required to learn biblical Greek and biblical Hebrew.
Rebuttal. There he goes again. It always comes up, doesn't it? In its original languages. Again, the word original basically means the appearance for the very first time. According to history of sources, like Wikipedia, Biblical Hebrew has changed its writing system dialect at least 4 times. So how could you know what the original language said if you don't have access to it? The only way is for you to go back in time. We don't even know when, who, how, where, or why Hebrew originated. Look at our own language. Do we even know the exact origination of English? No. We can speculate, but we don't know for sure. See this source. The history of the English language really started with the arrival of 3 Germanic tribes who invaded Britain during the 5th century AD. These tribes, the Angles, the Saxons and the Jutes, crossed the North Sea from what today is Denmark and northern Germany. At that time the inhabitants of Britain spoke a Celtic language. But most of the Celtic speakers were pushed west and north by the invaders, mainly into what is now Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. The Angles came from England, and their language was called English, from which the words England and English are derived. Question. Was anybody today there during the 5th century AD? No. Is there documented evidence that English originated in the 5th century? Possibly, but then you can only believe it because you were not there to see it originated. They could be either lying or mistaken.
The meaning of Textus Receptus is weird, but it basically boils down to being synonymous with the texts used for the KJV. It referred to a long succession of Latin, Hebrew, and Greek translations of the 16th century.
Rebuttal. And how would you know that? Does a manuscript have a date stamped on it? Is there documented evidence of the King James translators making this assertion in their preface to the reader? Have you read the KJV preface of the 1611? I have, 4 times. Not once in the entire preface, which is lengthy, did they ever make an admission to such nonsense. A common anti-King James Bible assertion, using any older manuscript to charge the KJV of flaws. Correction. There is no possible way you can date a manuscript to a certain time. All you can do is guess. No manuscript, I repeat, no manuscript counts for finding flaws in the KJV. 3 problems you have to keep in mind. All you know is 3 things. 1. It does not talk or speak for itself. 2. It doesn't have a date stamped on it. And even if it did, you can't prove as fact that it is accurate or somebody didn't make it up at some other time. 3. The author of a manuscript died. There's no way you can contact the author to verify the text. Why don't you know these? Because you weren't there to directly observe the origination of the manuscript. Therefore you cannot use that as ground to find a flaw in the KJV, because all you have is an opinion. I know the common response to that statement is, well, if you look at the writing style, the ink, or the paper it was written on, that points to a certain time when they used this certain ink and paper. How do you know that? Were you there? Do you have those people's email address or phone numbers to verify such assertions? No, you don't. They are all dead. It may be very possible that the writing style, ink, and paper was used at a certain time that you speculate. But that does not make it a fact. Therefore, to use the word fact and tie it to a historical event or time that you have not directly observed is bogus and dishonest. This is a heading section to the KJV preface, section 15. The purpose of the translators, with their number, furniture, care, etc. This is the only place in the entire preface where they basically briefly mentioned the sources they may have used, looked at, or simply referenced for direction. To put it in summary without giving all of the quotations, here was their conclusion of what they used or referenced for direction. 1. The Hebrew and Greek languages. 2. They possibly went over the Septuagint again, even though they admitted that it needed correction in many places. 3. The translators or commentators of the Chaldee, Hebrew, Syrian, Greek, or Latin, Spanish, French, Italian, or Dutch, etc. There's a common misconception, for example by James White in his debate with Jack Mormon, that the translators did not use manuscripts, but only print editions. That's hogwash because that's nowhere admitted by the translators in their preface. All we know is what they wrote in their preface of what they possibly used. Some things that people need to keep in mind. 1. There is not one Textus Receptus that underlies the KJV. That's very important for you to get. If you look on Amazon.com you'll see at least 4 different Textus Receptus in print. And they are all different from one another. 2. According to history and sources you could probably look up, there were approximately 14 different Textus Receptus in existence. The translators picked and chose from a variety of different texts and possibly manuscripts which ones they were going to use for their translation. Not out of carelessness or apathy, but in matter of, I believe, prayer and seeking God for their direction. Also from their education of languages and logic of what made logical sense. 3. There is no evidence they mainly used one version of the Textus Receptus or stuck to mainly a previous English Bible for their translation. 4. From what I read in their preface they had to make guesses on some words they did not understand. Maybe because they didn't have an idea of how to properly translate it. So maybe they put it in the margin. Some more observations to consider. I believe there were probably times they rejected the Hebrew and Greek for something else. Sometimes it was for a different Greek text. Sometimes it was for a Latin text. They didn't take the Greek at all. Sometimes they inserted an English phrase that's probably not found in any Hebrew or Greek. Sometimes they rejected the majority reading for a minority reading possibly. According to history and sources, 1 John 5:7, 8, probably the 2 greatest passages in the Bible for the Trinity, supposedly is only found in approximately 2 Greek manuscripts and the translators maybe told the press, we're going to put those verses in there. To make the claim by people like James White that they only had a few or limited sources to use for their translation, is such baloney because there is no evidence of that being admitted in their preface. They consulted other translators, commentaries, other translations of English, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, possibly even Spanish, Dutch, etc. They had, I believe, a big variety of sources to have access to.
For the Old Testament, this was a newer version of the Hebrew Rabbinic Bible published by Daniel Bomberg. Problems were pointed out in his translation, so the Textus Receptus that came from that was an edited version by Yaakov ben Hayim. Although this edition was better, it certainly had its own errors. It didn't matter too much though, since the people translating the text into English still changed a few things to fit their own views. For example, Psalm 22:16 in the KJV says, "Dogs surround me, a pack of villains encircles me. They pierce my hands and my feet." This is probably a mistranslation, however. Based on the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Septuagint, and the Masoretic text, the last line should read, "Like lions, my hands and feet." It's difficult to understand, but it probably means, like lions, they are at my hands and feet. It likely would have been changed to conform to already existing Christological views.
Rebuttal. How do you know the translators deliberately changed things in their translation to make it fit their own viewpoints of theology? Is there any evidence of this documentation that is caught in the text itself? Your example stating, for example, Psalm 22:16 in the KJV says, "Dogs surround me, a pack of villains encircles me. They pierced my hands and my feet." This is probably a mistranslation. KJV. Psalms 22:16 For dogs have compassed me, the assembly of the wicked have enclosed me, they pierced my hands and my feet. That's what the verse really says. I don't know what source you got your quotation from, but that's a complete misquotation and misrepresentation of the King James Bible text you are criticizing. Then you said, however, based on the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Septuagint, and the Masoretic text, the last line should read, "Like lions my hands and feet is difficult to understand." But it probably means like lions that they are at my hands and feet. It likely would have been changed to conform to already existing Christological views. The common claim of, the Septuagint or Dead Sea Scrolls are more accurate. How do you know those sources you reference to are more accurate? Just because people find manuscripts somewhere, that doesn't make them more accurate. Review my responses to the same blunder accusation about older manuscripts. The only way to know for sure what Scripture exactly originally said is to have the original manuscripts. They no longer exist because all we have are copies and translations. Therefore it is impossible to know what the exact original said. We had to exercise faith along with logic and evidence. If you are going to assert that the Septuagint or Dead Sea Scrolls are more accurate, first you would have to find if these two contradict. If they do, then the burden is on you to prove which one is correct and why and how. You can't compare the KJV to a manuscript that probably has errors in it. You have to have the perfected text. Is that text available today? No, according to what people say what was original. In that case, we can't build a case of knowing factual errors in the King James Bible because an error has to be proven as fact, not based on theory or opinion. If I made the claim that this portion of the Gettysburg Address is inaccurate because according to this source online it should be read as this, how would I know the online source is accurate? How do I know that is what Lincoln originally said? I don't know that. I guarantee you, any online source that shows the quotation of the Gettysburg Address is not the original. It's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. You would have to have the original paper with the original writing from Lincoln himself, or whoever wrote the words to it. In this time frame, he does a lot of storytelling. No documentation to back up any of these claims. Very similar blunder that James White commits in his book. Good principle, a story fabricated with no proof, makes the probability of it aloof. People throwing out a statement of explanation from history not directly observed and making it believable. For example, one accusation against the King James Bible is that the King James Bible translators were very limited in their resources and they only had a handful of texts to work with. Or even, they used printed editions for their translation, not manuscripts. This is easily refuted because nowhere in their entire preface did they ever state such things. They never stated they only had a handful of sources and they never stated they only used printed editions. At best, this is a fabricated history with no documentation of proof whatsoever. It is a desperate attempt to fabricate a history that they made up, or maybe something they've read from another source. But even if they read it from another source, that doesn't make it fact or true. I could just as easily make up a fabricated statement and say, the modern versions were invented by modern committees who wanted to deliberately destroy people's faith in the Bible and destroy people's faith in God and to turn them away from God. Is there proof of such a notion of people deliberately having that intention? There is no evidence. Now we know that Satan hates God and His Word, but I don't know of any profession Christian who claims they love the Lord Jesus Christ, who intently desires to destroy people's faith in God. Making claims with no documentation makes you a liar and should not be taken seriously. It's no different in that case than people who go on a camping trip and go around a campfire to tell fairy stories with hot cocoa. It's story time, little kids.
For Revelation specifically, he used a manuscript that was missing the final leaf, which contained the last 6 verses of the book. For these, he used Jerome's Latin Vulgate. Because of this, he incorporated things that don't exist in any Greek manuscript. For example, in Revelations 22:19, "And if anyone takes words away from this scroll of prophecy, God will take away from that person any share in the tree of life and in the holy city, which are described in this scroll." Here, Erasmus used the word book instead of scroll.
Rebuttal. Have you looked at every manuscript in existence for the Bible to prove your claim that he incorporated things that don't exist in any manuscript? Probably not. See this source. The New Testament has been preserved in more manuscripts than any other ancient work of literature, with over 5,800 complete or fragmented Greek manuscripts catalogued, 10,000 Latin manuscripts and 9,300 manuscripts in various other ancient languages including Syriac, Slavic, Gothic, Ethiopic, Coptic, Nubian, and Armenian. The dates of these manuscripts range from circa 125, the P52 papyrus, oldest copy of John fragment, to the introduction of printing in Germany in the 15th century. That's 25,100 total manuscripts. Have you looked through every one of them for your claim? No, you haven't. Therefore your claim at best is fabricated storytelling. Once again, you misquoted and misrepresented what the KJV actually states. You stated, for example in Revelation 22:19, KJV, and if anyone takes words away from this scroll of prophecy, God will take away from that person any share in the tree of life and in the holy city which are described in this scroll. Here's what the KJV really says. Revelation 22:19 And if any man shall take away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part out of the book of life, and out of the holy city, and from the things which are written in this book. This is the second time that you misrepresented the KJV. Get your facts right, or shut up. For this time frame, more storytelling of history with wild accusations and assertions with no documentation whatsoever. And these dumb atheists expect you to believe them. I already made a correction concerning this. Moving on.
With that, the basis for the KJV became the Textus Receptus. There were, of course, later editions of the Greek New Testament before the publication of the KJV and the later proclamation of it being received, but the translators of the KJV rendered a Greek text that was ultimately derived from Erasmus.
Rebuttal. That's not true. There is no single Textus Receptus that underlies the King James Bible. I already gave a rebuttal to this erroneous conclusion that you gave earlier. It is true according to history that some or a lot of the renderings may have Erasmus Greek New Testament. But it doesn't mean it was ultimately derived from that quick New Testament only. Another source. At the height of the Reformation there was approximately 17 different TRs in circulation. All just slightly different. How do you know the King James translators did not look at the rest of these Greek New Testaments and possibly others? You can't just narrow everything down and claim that it came from primarily Erasmus Greek New Testament. That's very poor lazy thinking.
Modern translations use actual methods of textual criticism and use better manuscripts. Since the 16th century, we have come a long way in trying to reconstruct the original text of the Bible. So I urge all the KJV-only Christians to please stop using it. It's not only archaic English that is difficult to understand with a modern lens, but it is also based on poor manuscripts. We have manuscripts of the Old Testament dating back to the 1st century BCE. We have New Testament manuscripts dating back to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries CE. On top of that, we have thousands of biblical manuscripts, and scholarship has been developing better methods of analysis to arrive at a closer reading of what is more likely original. Biblical scholarship has evolved, and so should your Bible. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching.
Rebuttal. Once again, you use the lazy phrase, better manuscripts. How do you know those are better? Unless there's a date stamped on them, there's no way you can prove as fact they were better. Also, older does not mean better. That goes on the blunder assertion that just because it's older, that makes it more accurate. That's erroneous thinking. There were many things according to history that people used to believe that are incorrect. For example, people used to believe a larger rock would fall faster than a small rock. This is false. They used to think the world was flat, but it's not. It's round. They used to believe if you bleed somebody, you could actually bleed out a bacterial infection. Which is how doctors almost killed George Washington. And many other examples of false beliefs people used to have that are no longer valid. Does that mean those beliefs are valid because they are older? That's nonsense. It looks like it has popped up again. You stated, since the 16th century we have come a long way in trying to reconstruct the original text of the Bible. How do you know you are reconstructing the original text of the Bible if you don't have the original autographs? There's no way you can know that. Look at all these supposed, updated or better Bibles since the King James Bible. And that's not all of them. According to sources there are approximately over 150 English translations since the King James. According to these, you had a bunch of different tries to reconstruct the original text. Why haven't you accomplished it by now? Surely you would have done it by now, if the King James is so corrupt. Are you telling me the committees who made these Bibles are so mentally depraved and stupid that they couldn't get it right? After all this time you still don't have it correct of reconstructing the original text? Oh yeah, you have come a long way all right. A long way all the way down into the ditch of money making. Those committees don't really care overall about reconstructing the original text. They care about the big dollar sign. Your conclusion is not authoritative. You tell them first of all, not to use it because of Old English, when you contradicted yourself and claimed that you tell your atheist friends not to bash Old English literature. And no, Old English is not difficult to understand. Just look it up in a dictionary, genius. Once again, you refer to manuscripts that go back, supposedly to the 1st century. There's no way you can prove that. You can only believe it. A type of writing style, ink, and possible paper used does not prove as fact that's where it came from, referring to certain time periods. You just don't want people to use that Bible because it's very clear of defining what sin is. It refutes your atheism, and you don't like it. You have given no proof or authority that the King James Bible is a bad translation. Your video is fraudulent.